Hello, and welcome to George Brown College's Labor Fair, Pandemic Edition.
Hello.
This year, for reasons our title indicates, we've decided to take our event fully online. Through videos and podcasts, we've aimed to document the actions and living discourse of the activists working in the streets and in the margins for fairness, equity, and social justice in an increasingly atomized and exploitative labor economy. Class consciousness begins by breaking down the dominant technological and sociological alienation so prevalent today. It begins by sharing stories and experiences. We're not going to change the world with social media, but it can help to get the word out. If you like what you hear, please like and share on social media, and be sure to follow us on Instagram or Facebook.
What's up, TikTok? It's your boy, Jared. Hi, my name is Jared. I'm an organizer with the Workers' Action Center. I've been working at the Workers' Action Center for like 3+ years now. So I got involved in the Workers' Action Center actually as somebody who just like heard about Dina Led when I was at talk at Ryerson. When she was talking about organizing and labor rights. It was very interesting to me that people were organizing workers who were non-unionized and precarious workers. And just so happens that I walked into actually this very office the next week and met Pam Fraish, the provincial organizer for 15 in Fairness. I got involved and very cliche, but the rest is history. Something like that. But I think I am very surprised about it because, organizing is all about finding new people, finding new organizers. And one of the key things that I hold is finding the next Jared kind of thing, finding multiple Jareds that can keep building their movement. And it just shows how much that outreach work, whether it's giving presentations, doing petitioning, talking to people on the street, one-on-one conversations. It's all about building collective power.
You talk about your origin story in connection to the Workers' Action Center.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the WAC, just broadly the organizing principles?
So the Workers' Action Center is a membership-based, membership-led organization, community organization, where we organize and fight for the rights of workers, precarious workers, migrant workers, gig workers, temp workers, racialized workers. It's been around, I think, for around 20 years now in all its incarnations. One of the key organizing principles that we have is that the people who are most affected by precarious works should be the ones who are leading, making decisions, and actually fighting for changes in decent work. It's not about this is a charity, we know best, we are academics, we are smart, we know what's best for you, let's calculate, let's talk to some policy wonks in an ivory tower to talk about what rights should be for workers. A lot of the demands that we push for, what should the minimum wage be, how many paid sick days do we need, what schedules should we fight for, what are the issues with wrongful dismissal and unjust termination. These are the things that are very critical in workers' lives, and that is why they're key demands that we are very strongly pushing for.
Maybe like a pillar of the WAC organization has to do with fair wages.
Yep.
I see early WAC actions connecting to a $14 minimum wage. There's been some recent changes to that. And I remember some of my students asking you when you were in the class about what projections might be coming down the line.
Right. So again, the wages that we are pushing for, the things that we believe in is that anyone who is working should be able to live decently. And again, the number that we get is through consultations and discussions and talking to workers about what workers are, on one hand, willing to fight for. is this a number where they're going to wake up in the morning and say, hey, this number will actually make a significant difference in our lives? But it's also not a number where it's like a pie in the sky, like, oh, that's never going to happen. So it's something that inspires people. They can fight for it, and they know it makes a significant difference. It's not like something like what the Ford government is doing right now with the $15 minimum wage, where it's too little, too late, right? So we were pushing for a $14 minimum wage when that was a demand that was would make a real change in people's lives. And now that the Ford government is putting in 15, we were pushing for 15 for years now. And 15 is not enough to get by during the pandemic, and especially given the rising costs of living in Ontario and in Toronto. And that's why we are at the Workers' Action Centre supporting the province-wide campaign of the Justice for Workers campaign for right now a $20 minimum wage, actually. So one thing that I am, on one hand, very hopeful for, and I'm very pleasantly surprised, is how the narrative of what a frontline worker is, how essential a frontline worker is, and how it's become normalized in the general public perception of what a frontline worker is. A frontline essential worker is somebody who makes sure that society keeps running. And sometimes it is, people think like, oh, who are the people that keep society running? Doctors, lawyers, and engineers. No, during COVID, it was people who were migrant farm workers, they were grocery store workers, Uber drivers, nurses. A lot of these people are the ones who are essential frontline workers who were forced to go to work during the pandemic to keep us safe and keep society going. And I found it very, I have a good, it makes me more optimistic when these kinds of things change in society. On the flip side, with the pandemic going 2 years on now, where grocery store corporations used to say, ooh, thank you frontline workers for doing what you need to do. We are going to increase pandemic hero pay by $2 an hour. In this current wave of the Omicron crisis, where I'm speaking about this now in January for this podcast interview, every grocery store has refused to increase pandemic pay. So when people say, thank you, frontline heroes, thank you, frontline essential workers, it's one thing to actually thank them. It's one thing to bang pots and pans, but I think employers and a government should thank them by making sure that there's better working conditions for everyone. I just want to address the other narrative that's been happening in the media, where on one hand, a lot of companies saying there's a labor shortage, there's a great resignation, nobody wants to return to work. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit and employment insurance is too accessible. People are just applying for them and staying home. I would just counter that by saying employment numbers are actually up in a lot of sectors. They're returning to close to pre-pandemic levels, but they're not going back to the jobs where work is precarious, where shifts are precarious, where people's health is put at risk. So I would say there isn't a labor shortage. There is a decent work shortage where people's health is put at risk without any benefits, without paid sick days, without proper protections at work, without fair wages. So if people really want to hire and keep and retain good workers, they need to provide decent working conditions.
My brother got a new job. He has some paid sick days. Mm-hmm. Recently, he was confronted with the idea where, like, he's at a party. He knows somebody there, was near somebody who got sick, and he's like, well, I got to go to work because my sick days got spent, and there's not anymore. and it's January. Can you talk a little bit about paid sick days and...
So a tricky thing about paid sick days, which is very much a key campaign demand that we've been pushing at the Workers' Action Center, and we have many calls on the hotline, is there's a lot of confusion and a lot of pressure on workers to go to work sick in order to pay their rent, in order to pay the bills. During COVID, this is not only a decision that a lot of people say, I don't want to go to work sick. This is dangerous, but I need to pay the bills. What should I do? And I am aware that the government is doing some things to push for paid sick days. So there has been some wins. It took very long, but there has been some significant steps forward. So for example, in British Columbia, the government there provincially have instituted 5 paid sick days. Federally, legislation has passed for 10 federal paid sick days, which still has some problems, I would say. And provincially in Ontario, we have 3 temporary COVID-specific sick days, which is not the same as permanent employer-paid sick days, which can use for anything. Right. So currently in Ontario, we have the Workers' Income Protection Benefit, which is gonna last. It keeps getting pushed back, but right now, on average, the people who have used it have used 2.2 days, but it's only 3 days available. So most people who have used it are almost gonna finish it up. And in that case, if you were sick once last year and you had to go take the vaccine, you had side effects, you needed to take rest because of COVID, you've ran out of the WIPB, which is a problem. So that's why we're saying 10 permanent paid sick days for everything without requiring a doctor's note is one of our key demands.
Can you describe what is like the shape of your work over the course of a day, over the course of a week? Like, what are you doing?
So most of the work that I do at the Workers' Action Center is mostly casework, mostly public education. So at the Workers' Action Center, so this is my office. I'm just at a corner of my office. I don't normally just sit next to a
bunch of books.
But a lot of the time we run a phone line 5 days a week where people call in, where we provide support for workers facing issues. So a lot of people call in, they say stuff like, hi, I've been working for the past 6 weeks. I don't have a contract, but I haven't been paid in the last 4 weeks. What should I do? Or they say stuff like, hi, I just lost my job. My employer said that I quit, but they actually fired me. How can I access employment insurance? So we help people navigate the employment standards where necessary, where we don't have expertise. For example, in issues around human rights, we can refer them to, for example, the Human Rights Legal Clinic, where it is a situation where it's employment standards. We do help people file employment insurance. We do help people file Ministry of Labor claims. Also throughout the week, for me at least once or twice a week, we do employment standards workshops in different places. We've done it at George Brown. We've done it at settlement agencies. We've done it at schools, giving a basic overview about our rights at work. So everything from minimum wage, schedules, paid sick day, no paid sick days. Giving people a basic understanding about our rights at work. So when they do get employed, they know what to fight for and push for at their workplace. So all of this is done in a very, how would I say, like individual kind of situation. But we know that the issue is very much systemic. So as much as we can help workers one-on-one address the issues, that is why we support the Justice for Workers campaign, which pushes for systemic legislative changes, right? We can have the best laws on paper, But if it's not enforced, if workers don't know about it, if employers continually skirt the law, then the best laws on paper doesn't mean much in practice. We can have sick days, but if they're not paid, people practically cannot access them. We can have laws against misclassification where workers are treated as it is illegal for workers to be treated as independent contractors as a way to avoid paying them, providing any of the workplace rights. But if misclassification is difficult to enforce and actually governments are passing legislation to make it easier to misclassify people, then laws on paper don't actually mean too much.
So you don't just do desk work though. Like you're literally in the streets.
I would say the tricky thing about the pandemic is that it is very difficult to go out and about. Things have very much changed the dynamic where I very much would like to be much more in the streets, where pre-pandemic, where we would be doing outreach, we would be at events, we would be talking to workers, we were doing petitioning. The pandemic definitely has made it difficult. I'm grateful for doing this microphone interview podcasty thing. But it's actually very rare to meet new people during the pandemic. For some weeks, we might be planning, let's do an outreach, let's do a picnic, let's do an event, let's have our meeting. But 2 weeks later, another wave comes in and things have to shift gears. Every year, for example, we used to have a big organizing training meeting, bringing workers together from across the province to strategize for the year ahead. For the past 2 years, that had to be canceled. We even tried to do it like mini versions where we had like 20 people in this February. That had to be canceled. So things have been very difficult. The Zoom dynamic has been difficult, especially when not everyone has access to high-speed internet, access to webcam, access to computer, or like computer literacy where they're able to download PDFs, fill out forms, arrange all of that stuff. So it has been difficult.
We have a question from one of my colleagues, Rima Schuster. They work with the Student Association and they work with and advocate for a number of international students.
Right. Hi, my name is Rima, and I coordinate the academic support program at the Student Association of George Brown College. Academic support works with students who are experiencing academic issues and barriers to fair education. There's no typical student or issue that academic support sees, but in the last few years, international students have made up a larger portion of our cases than before, and last year in the 2020-2021 school year, they accounted for nearly 50% of our cases, while only accounting for about 30% of the overall student population. Hi, Jared. Is it true that the Employment Standards Act doesn't apply to international students?
Thanks so much for the question. I would say that if you're working in a provincially regulated industry, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of your employment status, your rights are still protected under the Employment Standards Act. So it doesn't matter if you are an international student, it doesn't matter if you're undocumented, permanent resident, or citizen. Similarly, it doesn't matter if you're on probation, it doesn't matter if you're in training or you're in a trial period. If work is being done as in a provincially regulated industry, your rights should still be protected. You should still be paid for your time. So international students should be still protected by the Provincial Employment Standards Act. That said, because many international students have restrictions of where they can work, when they can work, how long they can work, and they have much, much higher international student tuition fees compared to domestic students. A lot of workers may be working over the hours, or violations about wage theft may be happening, and they may be worried and scared to actually push for their rights. Because if you have a job, which is difficult during the pandemic, it is difficult and scary situation to actually push against your employer to say, hey, I've been working for 50-hour weeks. Why aren't I being paid overtime? Because you need to work, you need to pay your tuition, you need to pay your rent. And many international students are planning to get permanent residency, and you need to have worked a certain amount of time before you get permanent residency. Because of that, and it's being held against them, where if you don't actually meet all these criteria, bad things happen to you. Again, on one hand, we have rights on paper. On the other hand, without permanent residency status, it is so difficult to push for your rights without having being punished, having reprisals against you. And that's one of the reasons why we support the call of the Migrant Rights Network and the Migrant Students United, where we say, everyone deserves permanent immigration status now, status for all. Because without permanent residency, a lot of people lack the ability to actually enforce their rights at work.
Are there parts about your job that keep you doing a job that causes you constantly to encounter injustice and human suffering?
So TBH, this work is stressful at a lot of the times. People call on the phone. People tend more often than not to call on the phone when you're in crisis, when things are going bad. And it is stressful for my mental health, for all the frontline caseworkers that work at the Workers' Action Center. That said, I feel very... it is a rewarding, and it is a very... I can sleep with a good conscience at night. That's what I would say, because the work is very meaningful work, and I'm very grateful, because there's a lot of jobs out there where people might not actually think the work is meaningful. It doesn't really contribute to society. But in this job, at least, I feel that, when I can actually make a meaningful difference in a worker's life, when they feel empowered to talk to their boss, to push for their rights because of the conversations that we've had, and that makes me very happy. And as much as, bad things happen, sometimes legislation doesn't go the way that we want it to be. We know collectively when we fight together, we win, and we have won in the past. So it's not so much a question of will we win? It's more of a question of when. And I know that when we have organized, we have won. So it's both liberating and a bit scary to realize that you have agency to actually make a difference in Ontario. One of the things that I would say that's pretty common, but it's something that I want to make sure that people know about, is that it makes our job much easier when workers come in to say, hey, I haven't, these workplace violations happen, and they have the evidence, they have the materials, they have the contact information for an employer. Unfortunately, it is pretty common for people to call in to say, I don't know my employer's last name. I only have a WhatsApp text message conversation. They've stopped answering. I don't have a contract. I've only been paid in cash. I don't have any pay stubs. Those things make things very difficult. Employers, on the flip side, try to do very much the opposite. They would say, don't worry about a contract. They would say stuff like, I'm just going to pay you in cash. It's easier. We won't do any deductions. It's better for you. They would say stuff like, let's not put this in writing. Just come to my office. Let's talk it out, as a way to avoid putting anything in paper. That's why one of the things that I always tell workers is to document. Even if you had a conversation verbally with your employer, do something like text them back, email them back right after to say, hey, we just had this conversation. To clarify, these are the things that we said. Or if you're applying for a sick day, say something like, we have 3 sick leaves, 3 job-protected sick leave in Ontario. I'm exercising one of them. Would you need me to provide a sick note? If not, let me know. I'll give you a report tomorrow. So employers do it on purpose to avoid asking and avoid getting anything down on paper. That is why I think it's very important that, anyone listening to make sure to document everything. When I was growing up, I used to just take my pay stub and my check and then crush on my pay stub and chuck it in the trash and just spend my money. But now I keep all my pay stubs because I know how important it is to prove when you work, how you worked, how many hours that you worked. If your employer refuses to give you a pay stub, immediately to me, that is a red flag. They could be cutting half an hour of your lunch break. They could be not paying your employment insurance and you wouldn't know and you wouldn't have evidence to prove it. I think COVID has significantly changed the landscape politically and broadly as well, very much in people's lives. Again, I would say, I think the terms of what essential frontline worker has entered the vernacular. I'm surprised it hasn't entered Time Word of the Year or something. I would say it's a Time Word of the Year. I think things are going to change very significantly in the next little while. But honestly, just my personal opinion, I think things can go really, really good or really, really bad. I think it's no longer a situation where things would just plod along slowly over time, changing a bit for the better, changing a bit for the worse. I think COVID has highlighted all the economic, health, and labor crises that are happening across the world, and both with very conservative elements and very progressive elements are coming up in response to it. So I think things are coalescing in very strong ways because I think whether it's a climate crisis, whether it is unaffordability of housing, whether it's a decent work or a health thing, things are going to hit a fever pitch. And I'm not sure when the bubble is going to burst, but I'm optimistic and I feel like I'm doing my part to make sure we have a response that actually helps everyone.
Looking ahead, projecting into that future, what sorts of things give you optimism? What sort of things might we organize around in order to accomplish that change?
I would say that, I'm organizing around labor, but I don't think everyone should be only focused around labor. I think it's okay. I'm speaking to a student audience, a faculty audience, that you don't have to be, all of us have to be labor advocates and all of us have to be climate activists. All of us have to be fighting for childcare, transit. I think all of us have what we're passionate about. And if all of us do our part, in whichever area that we feel most passionate about, I think that is the best because going back to one of the dark parts of my life or whatever, it is stressful to know that some weekends there is organizing meetings, demonstrations for many, many events. And the scope, the pressure of all of these things do weigh down on you because there's so much need that can be done, but there's guilt around not being able to do it. So one of the things that gives me hope and keeps me going is that knowing that I am doing my part in organizing around labor, and I trust that my comrades, my friends are doing their part, whether it's climate, whether it's transit, whether it's childcare, whether it is decent working conditions in our colleges and universities, and where things need to coalesce and come together, where we have a big action. let's do it, but it is okay to do what you need to do and also take breaks and celebrate your little victories.
Looking ahead, we have the election coming up. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what's at stake in your view?
I would say so the provincial election is coming up this June. It can be called earlier. It doesn't have to be. Typically, they let it run and call it when it is called. Because so much of employment standards is actually done provincially, this provincial election will have a significant impact on workers' lives in the next couple years. They control minimum wage, they control sick days, they control health and safety, they control whether employers have to give you a reason to let you go, whether they have to give you a good reason, whether it needs to be written at all. So there's so much at stake each provincial election, and they can really set the tone of what workers' rights will be in the next couple years. We at the Workers' Action Center are nonpartisan. We don't support any specific political party. What we do is know that we are support workers first. Not in the sense of not in I don't know whether it's too political, but not in the sense of
Go, please be political.
so like, for example, right now, Labor Minister Monty McNaughton and Doug Ford are saying stuff like, we're working for workers as one of the catchphrases. And when their first provincial election, they said stuff like, for the people. But when your minimum wage laws are so low, whose people are you fighting for? And are you actually working for workers? So I would very much like all political parties to support stronger minimum wage laws, stronger paid sick days. So, for example, the Greens, the Liberals, and the NDP all support stronger paid sick days legislation. And we had a die-in early last winter, in fact, where we said it's time for paid sick days. And all the opposition parties have pushed for paid sick days. And the Conservatives have voted it down, I think, at this point, 26 times in a row. So whichever party comes into power, though, in June the 3rd, doesn't matter if it's Conservative, Liberal, NDP, or Green, we want to hold every party to account, because we can't just say, if we vote for this party, they're going to take care of us. If the only solution is to vote somebody in and they will set everything right. I don't think that is true. Just like I don't think that if a Conservatives are in power, we can actually make significant wins. You know, we've got as much as it's bad to have 3 temporary COVID-specific sick days, we dragged kicking and screaming the Conservatives to actually implement that. When previously they said we will never implement paid sick days, the federal government has already addressed it. They said before $15 is too much too soon, and they put it in now. So regardless of which political party wins, we workers across Ontario, it is our responsibility to hold them to account. We have a hotline Monday to Friday from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. But if someone doesn't pick up, you can leave a voicemail. My extension is 226 if you do call in. Happy to address any questions. You can also send us an email. We'll just put the email on the screen here with our contact information. So that's one thing. If you're not sure, give us a call, send us an email, send me an email. Aside from that, we also hold workshops. We've done them at George Brown. If you are a group that would like a Know Your Rights workshop about your rights at work, we couldn't cover everything today, but there's so much that we would like to unpack. Happy to do a workshop totally free. And the last thing is on our website at workersactioncenter.org, we also have lots of fact sheets and information where people could get an overview about their rights at work in multiple languages. I would say that there are many organizations out there, and if you are passionate about lowering tuition fees, affordability, climate change, totally cool. Get involved. It doesn't matter what you get involved in, but do get involved. But if you do want to get involved with the fight for decent work across Ontario, you can join the Justice for Workers campaign. We meet online right now monthly. Go to justiceforworkers.org to fight for provincially changes, provincial decent work changes. If you're an international student, I know one of the other speakers for this labor fair is going to be Sarome. You could join the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change or the Migrant Students United to organize around international student issues such as gaining permanent immigration status for all.
Oh yeah. That's really useful. That's great. I think that's it. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to slip in edgewise?
Like, favorite, subscribe, smash that. Follow us on social media. Follow us on social media as well if you have. We're on Facebook and Twitter. You know, these little things are like snapshots in time, but things change very rapidly. Keep engaged. Give us a call if you have workplace issues. Join the broader Justice for Workers campaign. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Wake up. It's a pretty middle class day on your pretty middle class street. And you gotta go to work today. You're paid well for what you do and who you do it to. You get from what they take, and you make no mistake. And hey, you can't complain, but that's your privilege. Wake up, wake up. Your architects of dignity to the pale face of history, the democratic fantasy. 'Cause we could just forget a day, and if you want, could put it all away.